in October 2001. She is the first woman to be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole in Australia. She stabbed, skinned, decapitated, and then cooked John Price with the intention of feeding it to his children for dinner.
The following content contains explicit and graphic details. Viewer discretion is advised. Investigation Hour.
Born on October 24th, 1955, in Tenterfield, New South Wales, Catherine Mary Knight was the younger of twins to Barbara and Ken Knight. Her mother had already had 4 sons: Patrick, Martin, Neville, and Barry, from a previous marriage. She had another son, Charlie, with Ken Knight, and would soon birth another boy in 1961, Shane. Catherine grew up with many siblings, but this was no picturesque, happy family. She grew up in a very unconventional, chaotic home. Catherine's father, who worked at the local slaughterhouse, was a raging alcoholic and would abuse and rape their mother up to 10 times per day. Barbara, their mother, would confide intimate and sexual details to her young daughters about the abuse she was undergoing. She would tell them how much she hated men and sex, but that she had to put up with it. Although Catherine claims her father never sexually abused her or her siblings, she said she was sexually abused by multiple members in her family, including her brothers, until she was 11 years old. This was confirmed by multiple members in her family to be true. Their parents took turns in beating them with an electrical cord or a dog leash. These aspects of their childhood, which was abnormal to most, became a normal day-to-day for them growing up. In school, classmates would describe Catherine as a bully. She would often get into physical confrontations with students and even a teacher, and have fits of violence. By age 15, she would drop out of school, barely knowing how to read or write, and would get a job at a clothing factory. A year later, she got her dream job at the local slaughterhouse. At a mere 16 years of age, she would join her father, twin sister, and brother working there. This was considered a good job in their small town, and it was something Catherine was very proud of. She had a lot to prove and quickly climbed up in rank to earn a promotion as a deboner, and she received her own set of butcher knives to cut and skin the animals with. She was so obsessed with her job and so prideful of it that she would hang her butcher knives over her bed as trophies. She was quoted saying, "They would always be handy if I needed them." Coworkers claimed seeing Catherine often walking over to watch the pigs get their throats slit. In 1973, Catherine met her first husband, David Kellett. Things moved fast, and they moved in together. Then, a year later, marriage followed. Their marriage was far from peaceful. On their wedding night, Catherine attempted to strangle him when he fell asleep after making love 3 times. She demanded that they had sex 5 times. This was something her mother had told her growing up, that she had sex with Ken 5 times on their wedding night. Despite this, Catherine and David would stay together for 10 years before splitting. On their wedding day, Barbara, Catherine's mother, gave some advice to her new husband, David.
"You better watch this one, or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do the wrong thing, and you're fucked. Don't ever think of playing up on her. She'll fucking kill you."
After breaking up and getting back together multiple times, David had enough. the birth of their first child, Melissa Ann, in 1976, David left Catherine for another woman. Catherine was so distraught by him leaving, she lashed out. She walked down to the train tracks with her baby daughter in her arms and left her in the middle of the tracks to be run over by a passing train. Luckily, a man rescued her from the tracks from hearing her crying. That same day, Catherine had a fit, swinging an axe around, threatening to kill people around her. Police arrested her and she was taken to the hospital and diagnosed with postnatal depression, and then released. But really? They released her just like that? Not soon after that, she had another episode where she slashed a woman with a butcher knife and was threatening a child. She was then put into a psychiatric hospital and her husband came to care for her. Surprisingly, after all of this, David got back together with her, and they had their second daughter, Natasha Marie, in 1980. Their rocky relationship abruptly ended in 1984 when Catherine left David with their two daughters. Catherine met her second husband in 1986. His name was David Saunders. He was a 38-year-old local miner. All seemed well in the beginning of their relationship. A few months after meeting, David moves in with Catherine but keeps his old apartment in Scone. This really upset Catherine, as she felt he wasn't being faithful to her and she questioned his commitment. She became abusive and erratic with him. They would break up and get back together. In May 1987, they got a puppy together. Catherine wanted to prove to David how serious she was about him and to show him what she was capable of if he ever cheated on her. She took the puppy and slit its throat with a knife in front of David. Then she beat David with a frying pan until he fell unconscious. And still after all of this, David number 2 stayed with Catherine. In June 1988, Catherine gave birth to their daughter, Sarah. They decided to buy a home together to settle down. Catherine paid the home off and decided she was going to decorate it so nicely. Her inspiration for home decor? Dead animals, of course. Her passion. She filled the walls with taxidermied animals. Horns, skins, skulls, rusty hooks, knives, leather jackets, machetes, and more. The list goes on and no space was left empty, filling all of the walls with creepy decorations. All seemed well. They just bought their first home and had a new baby together. Never a dull moment with Catherine, though. After a fight between the two broke out, Catherine hits David in the face with an iron and stabs him in the stomach with a pair of scissors. This was the final straw for poor David. He left Catherine and went into hiding. Catherine would then file an apprehended violence order against him, so he wouldn't be able to visit their daughter or her. In 1990, Catherine met suitor number 3, John Chillingworth. Their relationship was more calm than the others. It lasted 3 years, and they had a baby boy together named Eric. Their relationship would end with Catherine leaving John for another man she had been cheating on him with, John Price. Her final relationship. John Price was a father of 3 children, but his marriage ended and he had been seeing Catherine for some time. He was described as a really well-liked, kind man. 2 of his children had lived with him and had really liked Catherine. John was well aware of Catherine's violent history and he still accepted her. Their relationship seemed really good and they were all really happy together. As time passed, Catherine moved into the house with them, but John was adamant on not getting married, something that Catherine really wanted with him. This triggered Catherine, and in retaliation, she sent images to his boss of stolen items John had taken from work. Granted, the items were medical kits that were thrown away, he was still fired from his job. After working there for 17 years, he was making a really good living, and in their small town, there wasn't much work. He kicked Catherine out of the house and had had enough. Somehow, Catherine really knows how to get these guys to come back to her. John and her got back together, but wouldn't let her move back in. John had told his friends and family of all the abuse he was receiving from Catherine, and many distanced themselves from him. In February 2000, Catherine assaults John and ultimately stabs him in the chest. She, of course, told police it was in self-defense and filed a restraining order. John told coworkers and his boss that if something happens to him, Catherine is to blame. I'm sure he could feel that something was going to happen. He went to the courthouse to get a restraining order against her. This, of course, didn't stick because Catherine didn't respect the restraining order and would show up to the house anyway. As he gets home, he sees that no one is there. Catherine had sent the kids away on a sleepover. John spends some time with the neighbors, and eventually he falls asleep at 11 p.m. Catherine gets home to find him asleep, makes herself dinner, watches some TV, showers, and then wakes John up to have sex, after which he fell back asleep. The next day, John didn't show up for work. His boss and coworkers became worried, given what John had said the night before. If anything happened to him, it was because of Catherine. His coworkers drove to his home and noticed his car was in the driveway. They knocked, but there was no answer. After noticing blood on the front door, they alerted the police. The police break into the home, and blood is everywhere. Blood splatter and smears littered the walls and the floors. There was even a large pool of blood in the hallway. Forensics concluded that Price was stabbed with a butcher knife in the master bedroom while he was asleep. Blood patterns indicated a struggle, and they believe Price woke up and fought back. After which, he stumbled down the hall and made it to the front door, opening it, only to be dragged back into the house where he would later be murdered. Price was stabbed in the front and back of his body 37 times, puncturing vital organs like the liver, stomach, both lungs, aorta, kidney, pancreas, and colon. To stab someone 37 times shows incredible rage toward that person. Many of the stabs occurred after Price's death, indicating Catherine couldn't stop herself from inflicting more wounds. This wasn't just about killing John Price. After she murdered her boyfriend, Catherine showered, got his ATM card, and took out $1,000. Police are still unsure what she needed the $1,000 for, but it shows that she was in control of her actions as she made a 60-minute drive just to get to the ATM. After getting back to the crime scene, Catherine would then do the unthinkable. She very precisely skinned Price's corpse, including his face, ears, and scalp, to where it was all one piece. She then hung it like a trophy on a meat hook in the hallway at the entrance of the home. Her knife work was so precise, the coroner was able to place the skin perfectly back onto his body and sew him up. As police entered the home, they didn't even recognize what the skin curtain was until they found Price's body. His body was discovered in a deliberate fashion with his left arm over an empty bottle and his legs crossed, sitting in an armchair. This position she put him in shows the disdain she has for him and that she wanted to mock his death. Upon entering the kitchen, even more horror was discovered. Catherine was preparing a family dinner of sorts. After she skinned Price, she decapitated his head and put it into a boiling pot with vegetables on the kitchen stove. She cut off meat from his back and buttocks and cooked it in the oven. She even fed some to the dog while she waited. The pots were still hot, and forensics said she got up early to cook, and it had been cooking for hours. The table is set and with name cards of Price's 2 children and handwritten notes next to each place setting. She intended on serving his 2 children their father's meat for dinner with a side of vegetables. Police go upstairs to find Catherine in bed, sleeping. Bottles of sleeping pills are strewn about next to her. She's unable to wake up. They remove her from the crime scene and she's taken to the hospital where she lies in a coma. After awakening, she claimed to have no recollection of anything that night. Catherine was eventually arrested and would stand trial for the murder of John Price. She would plead not guilty, only to change it later to a guilty plea. Her legal team would argue that she was dissociating and had amnesia, and this was supported by some psychiatrists, also stating that she had borderline personality disorder. Even though she pleaded guilty, she wouldn't accept responsibility for what she did. On November 8th, 2001, Justice O'Keefe sentenced her to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. The first time in history a woman ever be given this in Australia. In 2006, 5 years after her sentencing, Catherine would appeal to the life sentence, stating life in prison was too severe for the killing. This appeal was rejected. Thanks for listening. If you're into solved and unsolved crimes and strange mysteries, subscribe to us so you don't miss out on our weekly videos released every Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific Time. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like. It would really help us out. Until next time.
And hugs, but for Catherine Knight the end result was very different. You know how sometimes you taste or smell something super bad and just have to get somebody else to smell or taste it with you because it's so bad? That's kind of why I decided to create this video. You have to watch it to believe it. Join us. Born on October 24, 1955, in Tenterfield, Australia, Knight was the product of a scandalous affair between her mother Barbara and her father, Ken Knight. Barbara was not only already a mother of 4 boys with another man, but she even met Knight through her husband. When their secret rendezvous came to light, it rocked their small conservative town. Following this tumultuous start, Knight's chaotic childhood didn't get much better from there. Her father was a violent alcoholic who abused her mother multiple times a day. Barbara frequently discussed the details of the abuse with her children and told them how much she hated both men and intimate relationships. Catherine was reportedly sexually assaulted by numerous family members, but not her father, until she was 11 years old. These tragedies would help shape her lifelong distrust and disgust with men. With a home life steeped in fear, instability, and a complete lack of control over her circumstances, Kathy became a notorious school bully who frequently picked on smaller children. She once attacked a schoolmate with a knife, and a teacher who broke up the fight was injured in the process. Without ever learning how to read or write, she quit at the age of 15 to work at a clothing factory. A year later, she landed her dream job at a slaughterhouse cutting out the internal organs of animals. Kathy loved chopping up animals and working with knives, so much that she hung her first set of butcher knives over her bed. She never knew when she might need them, after all. It was oddly comforting to be able to take one last look at them before she went to sleep. It's hard to have a healthy view of relationships when you've been assaulted multiple times, your dad abuses your mom, and your mom regularly tells you how much she hates the male species, but Kathy still tried to find love. In 1973, Kathy met co-worker David Kellett, a raging alcoholic much like her father. They entered into a relationship together, and she promptly gained control of the relationship and dominated David in every way. David frequently got into bar fights, and Kathy would step in to back her hard-drinking boyfriend. She didn't fear bigger, more powerful men. Kathy eventually earned herself a reputation for threatening violence anytime anyone displeased her. In 1974, she convinced him to marry her. The couple showed up to the ceremony on a motorcycle, and David was drunk. Instead of passing along heartfelt advice, guidance, or congratulations to her new son-in-law at the wedding, Kathy's mom told him, "You better watch this one or she'll kill you. Stir her up the wrong way, or do the wrong thing and you're done. Don't ever think of playing up on her, she'll kill you." Barbara added that her daughter has got a screw loose somewhere. On their wedding night, Knight and Kellett consummated their marriage 3 times. When he fell asleep, Knight wanted a 4th round and took issue with her new husband's exhaustion, so she started to strangle him. David woke up and managed to fight Knight off. Even though she attempted to kill him only 1 day into their marriage, the union lasted for 10 more years. The marriage was, however, far from perfect. Kathy was vindictive, jealous, and violent. Somewhere along the way, the couple made the absolute worst decision possible: to have children. Being pregnant did nothing to mellow Kathy. The day after David called it quits, Kathy was spotted pushing Melissa Ann in a baby carriage down Main Street, violently rocking the carriage from side to side, slamming it against walls and fences. She was admitted to St. Elmo's Hospital in Tamworth and diagnosed with postpartum depression. She spent a few months in a psychiatric hospital, where she told nurses that she intended to kill a mechanic who had fixed Kellett's car, because that made it possible for him to leave her. Despite this threat, Kellett took Knight back when she was released from the hospital. Their reunion didn't last long, and Knight went through a period of deep distress after Kellett finally did leave her. Just a day after being released, Kathy took her 2-month-old daughter Melissa to some railroad tracks and placed her on the railway line. Then, she stole an axe, meandered into town, and threatened the lives of several people. Poor Melissa was found and rescued from the railroad tracks by a man known in the area as Old Ted just minutes before a train passed. Kathy was arrested and sent to St. Elmo's Hospital yet again, but she signed herself out the next day. Days later, Kathy grabbed her prized knife collection and slashed a woman in the face and demanded that she drive her to Queensland to find David. The woman was able to escape, but before the police arrived, Kathy managed to take a little boy hostage and threaten him with a knife. Police were forced to disarm the raging woman with brooms, and she was admitted to Marissat Psychiatric Hospital. The depth of Kathy's jealousy, vindictiveness, and anger shocked the nurses as they listened to their patient tell them how she planned to kill the mechanic who fixed David's car, which allowed David to leave her, then kill David and his mother when they arrived in Queensland. Upon learning the news, David, his mother, and his new girlfriend fled to Aberdeen. Now, either Kellett was still in love with Kathy, he felt bad for her, or he was too scared to leave her for good, because when Kathy was released from the hospital, David, along with his mother, moved with Kathy to Woodbridge, a suburb of Brisbane. In March 1980, for reasons I will never understand, David and Kathy had a second child together, Natasha Mary. 4 years later, Kathy left David. She first moved in with her parents, and then she rented a house in nearby Muswellbrook. She went back to her slaughterhouse job, but she injured her back the following year and went on disability. She moved out of the rented house, and the government provided public housing in Aberdeen. In 1986, shortly after her breakup with Kellett, Catherine Knight jumped into a whirlwind romance with David Saunders, a local miner. Within a few months, Saunders moved in with her and her 2 daughters. However, he kept his apartment, and Knight became incredibly jealous and suspicious about what he did when she wasn't around. Like her previous relationships, this one quickly grew toxic and violent. At one point, she slit the throat of his 2-month-old dingo puppy in front of him, just to show him what she was capable of. Still, they stayed together and even had a daughter a year later. However, Saunders left Knight shortly after the birth because she had attempted to kill him with a pair of scissors. She then met a man named John Chillingworth. They stayed together for 3 years and had a child, Eric, Knight's first son. While no violent incidents have been reported about their relationship, it ended after Chillingworth learned that Knight was having an affair with a man named John Price. Kathy's relationship with John Price started out fairly normal. The couple decided to live together in 1995. Price was the father of 2 older children who lived with him, and they seemed to like Kathy. Price's job as a miner was sufficient to keep Kathy comfortable. Kathy's comfort didn't last long, though. When she asked Price to marry her, he declined, and you can probably guess how Kathy reacted to the rejection. By the time Price hooked up with Kathy, he was well aware of her reputation. Maybe he thought their relationship would be different, or maybe he expected a certain level of abuse, but he never expected that falling in love with Kathy would have the consequences that it did. When Kathy didn't convince Price to marry her, she stole money from him and purchased an engagement ring for herself. When Price still refused to marry him, she went after his livelihood. Knight framed Price for stealing things from his company and got him fired. Though he initially kicked her out, a few months later they started seeing each other again. However, this time, he refused to let her move back in. According to their friends and neighbors, Knight's violence then began to escalate. In February of 2000, an argument between Price and Knight culminated with her attempting to stab him in the chest. He took out a restraining order against her in an attempt to keep his children safe. Toward the end of the month, Price let on that he was concerned for his safety and told his co-workers that if he ever went missing, it was because Knight killed him. Price knew his girlfriend wanted him dead, but hormones are a powerful thing. On the night of February 29, 2000, the same day Price applied for a protective order, Kathy went to his house while he was sleeping. The two had sex, and Price immediately dozed off. You know how much Kathy likes that. Gripping one of her recently sharpened knives, Kathy plunged a blade into her sleeping partner. Price jumped off from the bed and ran out of the house in abject terror, but crazy Kathy overpowered him and stabbed him more than 37 times. But when Kathy started stabbing Price, she was just getting started. She was about to become one of the most notorious killers in Australian history and the most notorious female killer in the country. Kathy was skilled at butchering animals, and Price's lifeless body was about to become her next project. First, she skinned Price and hung the skin from a hook in the living room. He was skinned post-mortem, thank God for small favors. Then, she decapitated him and tossed it into a pot and cooked it with some vegetables. Kathy cooked several other parts of Price's body, including his buttocks, and served them as steak along with the vegetables, a baked potato, and gravy. She planned to serve the meals to Price's children and placed the food on 2 separate plates on a table, along with handwritten, spiteful notes. But she wasn't quite finished yet. After setting out place cards for Price's children, she positioned the rest of Price's skinned body on his favorite chair, crossing his legs. Although Kathy slaughtered and cooked her man, she didn't eat any of him herself. Sensing how much trouble she was in, Kathy instead opted to take a handful of pills to end her life. She laid down beside the remains of her lover and passed out, but didn't die. Fortunately for the oldest Price children, they never had the chance to dine on their dad. They had been gone the previous night and hadn't yet returned. When a neighbor noticed that Price's car was still in the driveway and he hadn't gone to work, the neighbor knocked on his door to check on him. No one answered, and the neighbor noticed there was blood on the doorknob. She immediately phoned the police. When Kathy came to, she claimed to have no memory of the crime. She was to stand trial in October 2001, but suddenly changed her plea to guilty and was sentenced to life in prison, the first Australian woman to ever receive the sentence. Cannibal Catherine Knight's reign of terror was over. Now in her early 60s, she is currently serving her sentence at Silverwater Women's Correctional Center. When Kathy was facing trial, she was interviewed by 3 psychiatrists to determine her sanity. The doctors all agreed that Kathy was sane and knew what she was doing on the night of Price's murder, but they diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder might help explain Catherine Knight's extremely violent behavior, but it is extremely rare that it causes someone to do such evil things. It certainly was not the only contributing factor to her violent outbursts. Still, it's clear that Kathy probably had a combination of genetic factors and tragic childhood experiences working against her. Catherine Mary Knight was a miserable woman who had a miserable upbringing, and she took out her rage on the people she was supposed to love the most. She was terrified of being alone and terrified of losing control. But she was also a sane woman who knew what she was doing. Her comments regarding not signing her artwork suggest she knew it was wrong, but that doesn't mean she has empathy.